The book of Revelation is famous for its imagery of multi-headed beasts, falling stars, and apocalyptic plagues. However, the text begins with a grounded historical reality. In the late 1st century, the Apostle John lived in exile on the small island of Patmos, off the coast of modern-day Turkey. While there, John recorded specific messages from Jesus, addressed to 7 individual churches located on the mainland in the Roman province of Asia. A mail carrier delivering these letters followed a logical circular path. The route begins at Ephesus, travels north through Smyrna and Pergamos, looping down toward Laodicea. This path is notable for what it skips. Several prominent churches right along this road were completely bypassed. Jesus chose these specific 7 because of what the number represents in Scripture: completeness. Read in their original order, these 7 letters provide a chronological map of Christian history, tracing the development of the church from its 1st century origin to the end of the world. The timeline starts with the Ephesus era, covering the years AD 31 to 100. While the church successfully identified and rejected false teachers, it was already losing the intense spiritual passion of its founding generation. The message shifts as the timeline enters the Smyrna era, from AD 100 to 313. This is one of the only eras to receive no criticism, only an encouragement to remain faithful, even when facing prison and death. This era aligns with the period when Roman emperors established official policies to execute Christians who refused to recant their faith. Under leaders like Diocletian, the Roman state launched aggressive campaigns against the church, forcing believers to live under the constant threat of discovery and execution. The letter to Smyrna predicted a church defined by this baptism of blood, matching the specific historical experience of Christians during the first 3 centuries of the empire. A massive pivot occurred in AD 313, when Emperor Constantine issued an edict of toleration, ending state persecution and legally recognizing the church. This introduces the Pergamus era. As the church moved from being a victim of the state to a friend of the state, it began to compromise its doctrines with the pagan traditions of the empire. The timeline then moves to the Thyatira era, spanning AD 538 to 1565. The message for this period contains a severe warning against institutional corruption and spiritual adultery among the church leadership. While members of the church founded hospitals and schools, the institution's leadership repeatedly ignored internal cries for reform. The letter warns that this refusal to change would lead to a period of great tribulation, a warning realized in the late Middle Ages, as the Black Death and the 100 Years' War claimed tens of millions of lives. As the church achieved its peak of political power, it suffered its greatest spiritual decay, exactly as the sequential order of the letters indicated it would. The Sardis era, beginning in 1565, followed the initial fire of the Reformation. However, the movement quickly settled into rigid, formal creeds that prioritized precise terminology over a lived experience. This gave way to the Philadelphia era in 1750, a period defined by sudden and massive global action. This century saw an explosion of activity, including the first modern missionary societies, the Sunday school movement, and Christian-led efforts to abolish slavery. Just like the early martyrs in Smyrna, the Philadelphia era receives absolutely no criticism in its prophetic letter. This unprecedented era of global cooperation and self-sacrifice aligned with the name of the church, Philadelphia, which means brotherly love. The final era of the timeline begins in 1844 and continues to the present day, the Church of Laodicea. The ancient city of Laodicea was a wealthy commercial hub, famous for its medical school and a specialized eye salve produced there. The city was so prosperous that after a devastating earthquake, the citizens rejected financial aid from Emperor Nero, claiming they already had all the resources they needed to rebuild. Jesus uses this local history to describe the modern spiritual condition. He claims that while these believers think they are rich and self-sufficient, they are actually poor, blind, and naked. This era stands in contrast to the praise of Philadelphia. Laodicea receives only warnings, described as being lukewarm, complacent, self-satisfied, and unaware of its own danger. Because the first 6 eras match the history of the last 2,000 years, The description of Laodicea represents the current age of Christianity. The prophecy concludes with a direct invitation. Jesus describes himself standing at a door and knocking, waiting for anyone who hears his voice to open it. This timeline places our generation at the very end of this prophetic history. The only remaining question is how you will answer that door before the timeline runs out.